Hey guys, this is the Gaming Preacher. Welcome to another episode of a Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 game with commentary. This is the map Sanctuary. I'm going to be using the ACR. I got this gun out the other day because, I've just quit using this gun. I don't know what it was. I think it was because I started using the G36 and playing around more with my shotgun. I just kind of neglected my ACR, so it was feeling sad. It was getting depressed. It was getting kind of dusty, so I thought I'd get it off the shelf. You'll notice I've got some fancy camo on there, that autumn camo. Doing that in honor of the change of seasons. We are coming up on fall, coming up on autumn, getting cooler weather, getting nicer temps where I'm at. So I thought in honor of the change of seasons, I would decorate my gun accordingly. I don't know where all of you guys are located, but I know down here in the south, this is a great time of year. The weather is just much cooler. We're not in the 95 to 102 degree temperatures anymore. The bugs aren't as bad, the humidity is not as bad. It's just a great time to be able to get outside and not have to worry about just sweating to death. So I hope wherever you're at, you're enjoying the change of season, the nice fall weather that's coming up. And next thing you know, what's going to happen is going to be Christmas. We'll be starting a whole new year. So man, tell you what, as you get older, time really flies. I used to be able to eat a Snicker bar every day and not gain any weight. After I turned 30, those Snickers started catching up with me. And I tell you, ever since I turned 40, time seems to be just flying by. So be careful as you get older. Enjoy every day because time does fly. I wanted to mention something today. I want to talk about something regarding a book that I had read and something that I've really been thinking about for quite a while. I ran across a book called The Comeback Church. And some of you may have read the book. It was written by a person who is affiliated with Lifeway, which is a line of Christian stores as well as church supplies and literature, mainly for Southern Baptist churches, but everyone uses them. This guy had done a case study looking at what sort of characteristics made up a comeback church. Now you may be asking, well, what exactly is a comeback church? Well, if you think about it in terms of, say, for example, football or any kind of sporting event, if you've got a team who's down, who looks like there's just no way they're going to be able to come back and win, but in the end they manage to score, they come back, they score enough points to get in the lead, and they end up winning the game. And you say, wow, that team made a comeback. And that's exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about the comeback church. It's a church that has come back from, the world would say, defeat. Some of us, in the Christian community, might say a church has come back basically from the deathbed. Unfortunately, there are many churches out there that we would consider to be dying. And that doesn't necessarily mean, of course, that their members are old or aged or anything like that, but it means that spirit in that church is dying, is decayed. And as I've traveled all across the southeastern U.S. For my job, and I've been out in the middle of nowhere, believe me, plenty of times. It's just amazing at the number of churches that you run across. Particularly here in the South, you can hardly drive down the street or turn a corner without finding some kind of church. And I know in a lot of the rural areas, you see a lot of churches that are basically just abandoned. They're closed. They're not being used anymore. They've just ceased to exist. And what this book does is it outlines some of the things and some of the processes that have occurred in churches that have made a comeback. And it's a real interesting book, and it really is an encouraging book. I think that the main thing that someone would get out of reading this one is hope. If you're the leader of a church, even if you're just a member of a church, and you would consider it to be on the decline or stagnant, or unfortunately maybe even in the process of dying, maybe even ceasing to exist, this book gives you a great picture of hope, of what can happen and to turn that church around, to refocus that church on the mission that God has for it. And the thing is one of the great things about a comeback church is that it makes such a testimony to how God's people work, of how God's people rely on Him to complete the mission that He set out, not only for His people but also for His church. This comeback requires several things. obviously you've got to have a leader. And you know, it doesn't have to be the pastor. Obviously it needs to be at some point. But it can start with just a leader in the church, just somebody in the church who has a vision for that church to make a comeback. The key thing that you're going to find, and the key thing that the author of this book found in surveying all these churches of many different denominations all across the country, the one thing that a lot of those churches had in common in order to make a comeback was personal evangelism, or just evangelism and missions in general. And in our own church, the church where I pastor, I've really been working here lately on talking to the congregation, on preaching and teaching about personal evangelism. Because, you know, and if you're a pastor, you'll understand this, or you'll agree with this. If the pastor goes out and visits people, or evangelizes, or, you know, shares a testimony or witnesses to somebody, well, you know, that's their job, right? Many churches will say, oh, we don't have to do evangelism because that's what we hired the pastor for. That's his job. That's what he does. A church is not going to grow. A church is not going to be on the mission that God has for it if no one in the church is interested, is involved in evangelism except the pastor or just a few leaders in the church. You know, in the Great Commission, we're called to go and make disciples. We're called to make disciples. Not just certain people are called to do that. All believers are called to do that. And, you know, and I firmly believe, and I've seen it in, you know, in other examples, and you see examples of this in this book, that churches where the people, the lay ministers, just the congregation, the priesthood of believers, as we say, when those people begin to have a burden for evangelism, when they begin to speak to their barber, their beautician, the person at the auto mechanic place, person they run into at the coffee shop, when they start sharing their story and their testimony, when they start sharing the witness, the gospel of Jesus Christ, that's when lives are changed. That's when churches can make a comeback. And it's going to take people in the church to realize that evangelism is something that we all are called to do. All of us. And I think we've made it such a complicated event. I think we've made evangelism something that's so compartmentalized. What we do is we put evangelism, we put the gospel in a box. And we carry it to church with us. And while we're at church, we open up the box and we let evangelism out. We let it get some air. We let it breathe. We let a little light in. When we go around in town, when we're at Walmart, when we're at the grocery store, you know, when we're talking to our neighbors, we're talking to our friends, and we're carrying around that box that's got the gospel in it, we keep it closed. We keep a lid on it. We keep it shut. So we've compartmentalized the gospel where it's only appropriate. We can only bring it out in certain situations or at certain venues. When we should have that heart, when we should have that desire to share the gospel anytime, any place, with anyone. Because look, what is the gospel? The gospel is just a story. It's the story of what Christ has done for you and for all people. And when you share your testimony, you don't have to memorize a book of the Bible. You don't have to memorize all this theology. A testimony is just like what you do in court as a witness. You're sharing a testimony of events as you saw them, as they happened to you, as you observed them. And that's what sharing your testimony is. It's just sharing your witness, sharing your story of what God has done in your life. What was my life like before Christ? What is my life like now after Christ? And that's really all it is. And we need to quit worrying so much about rejection, worrying about fear, worrying that we're going to offend someone, because I'll tell you right now, the gospel is offensive. It offends people because we're sinners. And this book just outlines a wonderful story of how churches can make a comeback. And a big part of that is going to revolve around personal evangelism and on missions. So if you're in a church that maybe is in decline or needs to sort of re-energize itself, I'd urge you to grab that book, Comeback Church, and take a look at it and see that there is hope. And begin praying now for that vision in your church. Guys, this is the Gaming Preacher. God bless, and we'll see you later. Bye.